Shortcuts keep turning into trust decisions. It's kind of the whole show today. A GitHub workflow gets treated like plumbing until it hands over a token. A version tag looks stable until somebody moves it. A cloned Windows image looks fine until the platform finally decides it cares. And a skills marketplace looks like discovery right up until you remember the code is coming from wherever that URL points. That's where we're at. Hey, I'm Brian Teller. I work in DevOps and SRE, and I run Teller's Tech. This is Ship It Weekly, where I filter the noise and focus on what actually changes how we run infrastructure and own reliability. Show notes and links are on shipitweekly.fm. If the show's been useful, follow it wherever you listen. Ratings help way more than they should. And if you want more signal between episodes, check out oncallbrief.com. We have 5 main stories today, then the lightning round, and we'll wrap with the human closer. We're starting by coming back to the Trivy story, but from a different angle. We already covered Trivy on the show on episode 24. The reason to revisit it now is that it is clearly not just one ugly repo incident. It was part of a bigger GitHub Actions campaign. After that, GitHub has one of the better platform engineering stories I've seen lately. They rebuilt search high availability in GitHub Enterprise Server because the old shape could literally trap people in a bad maintenance state. Then a Windows Server 2025 identity mess that feels extremely real if you've ever lived through cloned image weirdness. And finally, agent skills, because apparently we are rebuilding package manager history all over again. Except this time, the packages can inherit shell access, file access, and credential. Story 1. Trivy was part of a bigger GitHub Actions campaign. Let's start there. I don't think the Trivy angle is really the headline anymore. The bigger story is that OpenSSF warned on March 1st about an active campaign called Hackerbot-Claw. Their advisory said it was actively scanning public repositories for weak GitHub Actions workflows and exploiting them to execute code and steal credentials. InfoQ's follow-up said the campaign hit projects tied to Microsoft, Datadog, CNCF, and Aqua Security, and that it got remote code execution in 5 of 7 targeted repositories. That matters because it takes this out of the bucket of one repo got unlucky. This is a real pattern now. OpenSSF's write-up called out the exact stuff most teams already know they should be nervous about. Privileged triggers like pull request target, running untrusted code from forks, inline shell, unvalidated input, weak auth checks before workflows run. And they were pretty blunt about the response too. Review, harden, and monitor your workflows now. So for me, the real lesson is not wow, an AI bot did a thing. The real lesson is that repo automation has become part of the trust boundary, and a lot of teams still treat it like background glue. It isn't glue anymore. If a workflow can write releases, publish artifacts, touch environments, or push back to the repo, that is real production adjacent power. Attackers know that. We should probably act like we know that too. One thing I'd actually do after this episode: pick a couple of workflows and ask a very boring question. Where exactly does untrusted input enter? And where does it land? Branch names, PR titles, file names, checked out code. If you can't draw the trust boundary cleanly, you probably don't have one. Story 2. Xygeni and the problem with mutable trust. The Xygeni one is a perfect follow-on because it is the same lesson from a different direction. Step Security reported that the official Xygeni action was compromised on March 3rd when an attacker using stolen maintainer credentials injected a reverse shell and moved the mutable v5 tag to a malicious commit. The nasty part is that repos using @v5 did not need to change their workflow file at all. The trust moved underneath them. Step Security later said Xygeni removed the bad tag on March 10th, rotated contributor tokens, enabled release immutability, and added tag protection rules. That's what makes this one so useful. Nothing had to look different in your YAML. No scary PR. No obvious version bump. No, why did Dependabot open this? Just the same reference, now pointing somewhere else. And that is why I keep coming back to this idea that mutable references are not a minor detail. They are a trust decision. Teams talk about major version tags like they are basically stable, but they are only stable if the permissions, protections, and release process behind them are stable. If the tag can move, the trust move too. So I would not make the takeaway pin everything or you're reckless. I'd make it a little more honest than that. Know what layer your trust lives on. If you are depending on a mutable tag, say that out loud. If you are okay with that trade-off, fine, but make it a real decision. Don't let it be an accidental one. And if you own internal reusable actions, this is a pretty good excuse to tighten those up right now. Tag protection, signed commits, release immutability, SHA pinning guidance, the usual grown-up stuff. Story 3. GitHub rebuilt high availability search in GitHub Enterprise Server. Now for the one that is not mostly security doom. GitHub published a nice write-up on rebuilding search high availability in GitHub Enterprise Server. The old model clustered Elasticsearch across the primary and replica nodes. GitHub said that created ugly failure modes during upgrades and maintenance. A primary shard could move to a replica. Then that replica could go down for maintenance, and the whole thing could get stuck waiting on itself. Their new design uses Elasticsearch cross-cluster replication and moves each enterprise server instance to its own single-node Elasticsearch cluster. GitHub says support starts in GHES 3.19.1. I like this story because it feels like real platform work. Not we added an AI button, not we made this graph go up. More like this architecture had a shape problem, and the shape problem kept showing up during normal operations. So we changed the shape. That's good engineering. And a lot of teams are sitting on something like that right now. You know the kind of system I mean. It mostly works, but everybody knows upgrades are touchy. Maintenance has to happen in the correct moon phase. Failover is theoretically fine, but nobody wants to test it on purpose. That usually means the system does not need another warning label. It probably needs a different shape. That's the part worth stealing here. If a core platform component keeps demanding perfect choreography just to survive normal admin work, stop asking how to babysit it better. Start asking whether the design is wrong for the job now. Story 4. Windows Server 2025 is surfacing old image sins. This one is a little less flashy, but man, it feels real. Microsoft published Exchange guidance in March for Windows Server 2025 systems built from non-generalized images. The root issue is duplicate computer SIDs. Microsoft says those can happen if you deploy an image without running sysprep, clone an existing Windows Server instance, or reuse a VM snapshot or image the wrong way. And the reason this is showing up now is that KB 5065426 introduced strict checks for duplicate SIDs. Microsoft also says PS get SID is the way to verify it. I wanted this in the episode because this is such a classic ops problem. The bad habit can sit there for a long time, maybe years. Everything mostly works. Then the platform hardens one layer of identity behavior. And suddenly, you're not dealing with security improvement in the abstract. You're dealing with a weird auth failure that sends people digging through the wrong part of the stack for hours. That's the pattern. Hardening doesn't just improve security, it also drags old shortcuts into the light. So if you are in one of those environments with old templates, old images, or cloned Windows boxes nobody has wanted to touch, this is a nice reminder that it works and it was deployed correctly are not the same thing. One practical move here. If you've got any suspicion your Windows fleet has image history you don't fully trust, go check before the next update checks for you. Story 5. Agent skills are replaying package ecosystem history. The last main story is the one that keeps getting more obvious. Socket wrote in February that skills.sh had already indexed more than 60,000 skills across tools like Cursor, Claude Code, GitHub Copilot, and Windsurf. and that anyone can publish a skill from any GitHub repository. Their point was simple: skills are decentralized by design. So they inherit the same supply chain problems we already know from places like NPM. Then Sneak took a harder look at the ecosystem, and their numbers were not exactly comforting. Their February study scanned 3,984 skills from ClawHub and skills.sh and said 13.4% had at least one critical issue. 36.82% had at least one security flaw of any severity, and 76 malicious payloads were confirmed through human review. They also called out the part that really matters operationally. These things can inherit shell access, file access, credentials, messaging access, and persistence through memory depending on the agent they extend. That's why this story matters to me. Not because agent skills are risky is some hot take. Of course they are. It matters because this is the same old supply chain problem wearing a newer outfit. Lightweight distribution, easy publishing, borrowed trust, code coming from repos you don't control, and a whole lot of people treating discovery as if it implies review. It doesn't. Popular does not mean safe. Installed does not mean verified. And it's just a skill is probably going to age about as well as it's just a package. So if your team is experimenting with skills, subagents, MCP servers, whatever flavor of extension system is hot this month, treat that install path like a real dependency path, because that's what it is. A few quick ones before we wrap. GitHub paused enforcement of the minimum self-hosted runner version requirement. The version is still v2.329.0. Runners below that can still register for now. But GitHub also said the long-term direction has not changed. So this is a pause, not a pardon. GitHub also rolled out March secret scanning updates. They added 28 new detectors from 15 providers, turned on push protection by default for 39 detectors, and added more validity checks. I like this one because it is the kind of boring improvement that actually saves people from themselves. And one more little connective tissue point from the OpenSSF advisory. Pin third-party GitHub Actions by commit SHAs. Keep workflow permissions minimal, and stop using privileged triggers unless you really need them. That advice is not new, but the campaign is a nice reminder that we know better and we configured it better are not the same thing. I think the cleanest thread through all of this is that convenience keeps getting mistaken for safety. A workflow is convenient. A tag is convenient. A cloned image is convenient. A skill directory is convenient. And none of those things are neutral once they start making trust decisions for you. That's the real pattern here. The Trivy follow-up story is really about CI being part of the trust boundary now. Xygeni is about mutable trust hiding under a stable-looking reference. The GitHub search story is what it looks like when a platform team admits the system shape is the problem and they fix it. The Windows story is what happens when the platform finally starts enforcing a thing you were sloppy about years ago. And the skills ecosystem is just the latest reminder that the minute installation gets easy, trust gets fuzzy, unless somebody does the work to pin it down. So the operator version of the episode is pretty simple. Stop calling these things helpers if they can change outcome. If it can execute, publish, authenticate, install, or inherit credentials, it is not just automation. It is part of the control plane now. And that means you owe it the same questions you always owed production. What is mutable? Who can change it? What is isolated? What is logged? What fails open? And what are you trusting by default that you probably shouldn't be? All right, that's it for this episode of Ship It Weekly. Quick recap. We came back to Trivy by zooming out to the bigger Hackerbot-Claw campaign, then Xygeni and tag provisioning, GitHub rebuilding high availability search in GitHub Enterprise Server, Windows Server 2025 surfacing old duplicate SID problems, and agent skills replaying package ecosystem history, except with even more access and worse defaults. Links and show notes are on shipitweekly.fm. You can also find the video versions on YouTube. And if you want the signal before the episode, check out oncallbrief.com. If this was useful, follow or subscribe wherever you listen. And send it to the person on your team who still thinks CI, tags, images, and just helper tools live outside the real trust boundary. I'm Brian, and I'll see you next week.